Well, it will be the matter of the perfect crime, of the murder of the real, and of the radical illusion. All in the same. Murder of the real, or perfect crime, it resonates a little like Nietzsche's famous phrase proclaiming the death of God. But this symbolic murder of God in the 19th century was going to change the destiny of things. In the perfect crime, it's no longer a question of God, but of reality. And it is no more a symbolic murder, but an extermination. Extermination means exactly the same as for the Nazi extermination camps. There it was physical and radical, whereas here it operates in a literal mode. Extermination means that it passes beyond its own end or its own finality. To exterminate is to propel something beyond its own end so that it no longer has any reason for being or any reason to exist. Extermination means that nothing is left, not even a corpse. The corpse of the real has not been found simply because the real is not dead. It has purely and simply disappeared. Its trace, its body, its corpse cannot be recovered. In a virtual world, the question of the real, of the reference, of a subject, of liberty, can no longer even be posed. All of this refers to Elias Canetti when he says that beyond a certain precise point in time, history has no longer been real. Without realizing it, human existence as a whole suddenly escaped from reality. From that point on, nothing of what happened has been true, but we can in no way have an idea of it. Our task and duty now would be to recover this point, and as long as we cannot do it, go on in the actual way of destruction. What can be said of this blind point of reversal, where nothing is either true or false any longer, and everything floats indiscernible between cause and effect, between origin and end? Is it reversible or irreversible? Can we move back to this point where the line of history has broken and where we were projected to the other side of the mirror? Who knows? Nobody knows. But by reality, I mean the principle of reality and the whole system of values connected with it. The real as such presupposes an origin, an end, a past, a future, a continuity, a chain of causes and effects, a rationality. No real exists without these elements, and the vanishing of the real is the dislocation of all this configuration, or this constellation. Of course, I anticipate a little. In fact, this perfect extermination could only be achieved if the processes of virtualization were fully realized. Fortunately, it's not the case. As in the best detective novels, the crime is never perfect. Some traces always remain. We are in a situation like Borges' fable of the map and territory. Borges says that nothing more remains but fragments of the map scattered throughout the space of the territory. Now we must invert the phrase and say there is nothing left but a map, in other words, the virtual abstraction of territory, and on this map some fragments of the real are still floating and drifting. Thus, there is no corpse and no victim either. And as for the presumed murderer of this perfect crime, it's a total mystery. The murder can be imputed to anyone. Not any subject of the murder can be identified. I would say that the weapon of a crime is the crime itself. Of this total actualization and volatilization of the real, of this unconditional hyper-realization of the real, there is no class or group or subject to be charged with responsibility. Seemingly irreversible, this process is what we call progress or rationalization of things, simply becoming exponential and in some way chaotic. As for knowing why we go on irreversibly towards this expiration date, we must suppose, for example, that the whole human species has devoted itself to a sort of automatic writing of the world, where the human subject as such disappears. In this automated and operationalized virtual reality, the subject no longer has any functional or critical incidence. It can vanish without the world taking account of it. It becomes a useless function, just as the sex function in clothes. As all traditional functions, subjective, critical, political, sexual, social, economic, moral, become useless in a virtual world. They survive only as emblematic or simulating function, as fake or alibi. Once again, this can be said only by anticipation of a system pushed to the limit. That means that it's not yet realized, but only virtually realized. This process, however, this progress of our technologies seem irreversible, expanding today without constraints, for example, in what is called the information highways, what we could as well call the highways of disinformation, of course. It seems like a huge and irresistible collective compulsion driving our spaces toward the point of an unconditional realization of reality. We are involved in a gigantic countdown, the finality of which remains unknown, since we have already passed beyond the end. In some way, this is related to what I have called the extreme phenomena. Having reached a point beyond their own end, extreme processes develop by accelerating in a totally imprevisible way and according to catastrophic forms in the sense of René Thom. At this stage, there is no longer any linear unfolding. Everything is precipitated into a turbulence that makes every expectation rationally impossible. All the more impossible, as in a world like our own, where everything becomes visible, must become visible, nothing more is previsible anymore. It's toward this absolute transparency that virtual processes converge. The virtual reality implies a temporal short circuit that we call real time.